What's your name?
Ruby.
Can you say, hi, this is Ruby, and this is our dad's garage?
Yeah. Hi, this is Ruby. And this is our dad's garage.
Okay guys, so we're going to tackle this steering box this morning. And I've already removed the outer screws or the outer bolts here from this cover. And what we're going to look at, there are main bearings in the top up here of the steering box, and in the bottom of the steering box. This is the one that I have already replaced, but I'm going to show you exactly how I did that. But the other things that you'll want to do is also inspect the needle bearings that are inside both sides of this main, I think that's called a sector gear, I believe is what they call that. And I'll show you how to get that thing out of there. But I want to show you that. I'm going to set this camera up so maybe you can see how to do that. This is an adjustment for final adjustment when you finally get it in. It's supposed to have a nut on there. Mine didn't have that. It's just missing. But that also holds this cover on. So once you get your screws out, you'll have to get a screwdriver that's narrow enough that as you tighten it, you're actually going to tighten it and the cover will start sliding towards you. But your screwdriver is going to have to pass through the hole in order to get that cover all the way off. And this is a gross job. There's a lot of nasty inside this thing. So get a lot of paper towels. There's a needle bearing inside there, so we'll want to clean that up, and we're going to inspect that needle bearing and just make sure it's good. I'm going to put a link on this website to a guy that I found online that he's got a very detailed video on how to do this. Now he's talking about a 1953 to I think a mid-60s Corvette. But what some people may not know is that's exactly the same steering column that's in the 53 Bel Air and 210. It's the same gear, same column, same everything. So you may not know you were driving such a high performance machine, but that's what you're driving. Anyway, when you get inside here, you've got that little gizmo that sits down inside that groove, and that's what kind of allows you to make adjustments. There is a washer that's against that. It's very specific. It's I think it is 65 thousandths of thickness that's supposed to be, and it's a hardened washer, so just a regular washer will not work there. Well, it probably will work for a while, but that's not the way it's designed. But that does sit in there. You'll want to put that aside and make sure you don't lose that. And then if you can see the orientation of that worm gear, you can see where the worm gear is tilted way, what is that? I don't know, way forward inside there. You'll have to put your steering wheel back on your column because, do you see the shape of this? That's what allows the worm gear to pass its way out. So the only way to get that out, as I turn the steering wheel, you watch and see what that does. And here it comes back around, and once that lines up, then you can take a rubber hammer. Let me set this back down. You can take a rubber hammer on the backside and you can knock that whole thing out. It'll only come out in that direction. So that way you can then inspect on the opposite side, the needle bearings on that side. Now, a lot of people think you just replace those because they're wear items, and I guess you probably should, but you're gonna have to have some specialty tools to get that out. Not so much that one, but this one is going to have some specialty tools required because you can't get to the back side of it. The end one will fall out easily once you get to the main bearings inside here. But to get to this one, we're going to pull the whole steering shaft out. To get to the race on that thing, he shows in the other video kind of how to do that. That's it probably not necessary, just to be honest. Now, if I was paying somebody to rebuild it, I would think that you know, they're a professional, they've got all the right tools to do it, and I would expect them to rebuild that. There's no way I would ever know if they did or not, I bet half the time when people pay someone to rebuild it, that's never done because it's a real pain to get that out. Okay, well that's the sector roller bearing that came out of that car. And I noticed it had a little catch in it. Now there was some metal debris in this steering box from the absolutely destroyed bearing that came out of down here. There was just little chunks of metal laying in there. And I felt that in the wheel when you would turn it, even after I had put this back in, and I felt like there was something going on. And there seemed to be a piece of trash, metal trash, stuck inside that bearing. And you're gonna see on this bearing right there, some pretty good gouging. I have taken my file and I've smoothed out all the really rough stuff. Now, as that bearing comes through its range, it's only going to make contact with that worm gear, or I don't even know what they call that worm gear, but with the rod bearing in the extreme one position or the other, depending on which way I put it in there. So it's not going to make contact with it in that driving position of, you know, anywhere from you know, a quarter of a turn left or right, where normal driving on the highway. So I don't think you would really feel that. So I've been looking online for this bearing. First of all, I haven't found anybody yet that carries it, but it's going to be expensive. So that's just a dirt on it. That's going to probably be expensive. And I've cleaned it up. I've shot the degreaser down in there in it, and it rolls really freely now. So I think what I'm going to do, if I can't find that online at a reasonable price, I'm going to put that one back in. You know, if you were building a race car or something like that, you wouldn't want to use that one. But I'm going to use that one. And I think it's going to be fine. So we've got that out. The next thing to do is to get the bottom bearing in here that I've already replaced them. I'm going to show you how to get to it, and then I'm going to go ahead and pull the steering tube all the way out, just so you can see how that's done. I'm going to look at this race up here. I'm going to inspect it with a flashlight and kind of get an idea of what that looks like. I'll be able to see it kind of up in that direction, and if it's not, if it's nasty, I may think about taking it out. And that's the new bearing, but that's the one that was absolutely destroyed before. So I'm going to carefully take that one. I'm just going to lay it like this. Okay, so I've taken the steering wheel off of the other end. I'm going to tap it a little bit with this rubber hammer. Sometimes you have to push up a little bit inside here to get it to fall out. There it is. And that will come all the way out. That's what you're looking at. That's the other gear. So we'll clean that up and we'll take a look at that, but I'm already seeing this bearing up here looks like it's in great shape. Guys, so good news, bad news. I looked up through there, shot my flashlight in there, and looked at the race on that bearing at the top of the steering box, and it is absolutely perfect, so that's great. The bearing that came out of it, which is this one, I'm going to go ahead and replace it because I've got a new one. You buy these, and when you do, you get two, so you might as well take that and replace it. That's easy enough. The bad news is, I want you to inspect the actual worm gear and look at that, all that wear. That thing is really kind of boogered up. So normally what I would do at this point is stop the video and I would order some parts, but I've gotten online and I've been looking, and this is a crazy expensive little guy right here. So I thought, you know what, worst case scenario, I've got time, I'm going to put it back together and I'm going to see how it does. So I'm just going to put it back together. So what I did to kind of come to that conclusion is I took my bearing and I just rolled them together. I can't do it with both hands here, I can hold the camera at the same time. But if you can see how that sits in the groove, do you see that space? These surfaces are not what they call congruent surfaces anyway. They don't come together perfectly. And by the time they get out to this angle, when they're out here, because this thing passes through an arc, that's the way it works. It rotates. Okay, so these surfaces are never really congruent anyway. They don't ride directly together. So if there's a little bit of irregularity on that surface of that, it may look bad, but I bet it doesn't do, or I bet it does very little to affect the performance of this gearbox, as long as it's lubricated well and it doesn't get a whole lot worse. So I'm going to put it back together just like it is, and I'm going to let you know if that's okay. I think the issue is when you get trash in your gearbox from, I mean, this went somewhere. All of that metal went somewhere. And if it got inside a bearing, or if it got inside a roller bearing on the side, or if it finally settled, as most of it does, at the bottom down here, that's probably what destroyed this bottom bearing, was pieces of this worm gear that have actually just worn off. And I'm not sure what that caused that to wear off. It could have been over tightening of the adjustment screw and driving it that way. Just don't know. So we're going to try that anyway. I'll probably get online and order some parts, but I do want to feel what this feels like once I put it back together anyway. Okay, so I've slid this bearing back up here to where it belongs there, and to hold it in place, I like to use this lithium grease. It's just thick. I don't know if maybe it just doesn't feel like it's as disgusting and gross as other grease, but it's good stuff. So I'll lube that up pretty good, and that'll kind of stick that bearing where it's supposed to go and help to hold it in place. Right in there. I mean, I don't guess a little extra grease ever hurts anything. Okay, now I'm going to slide it back up into that tube. There's a hole at the top up by the steering column that you can pass your finger into, and when you slide this tube up, you're going to have to guide the very end of it past the top bearing in order to get it to go all the way. And if you jam it up there, you'll knock that bearing out, so don't do that. So I take my finger and stick up there, and I can feel the end of that rod. And I just give a little tug or a little push. And now it's in. Okay, I've reinstalled the bearing now into the sector gear, and it's time for getting it to go back in. But before I do that, I'm going to pack it down with this lithium grease too. Same thing. Manufacturer says 90 weight gear oil in this is what it calls for. They don't recommend, they never did recommend that we pack these bearings. Don't know if that's the right thing to do or not. It seems like 90 weight could be the reason that these things leak a little bit. So I'm also going to do a new gasket. I'm going to Teflon tape the end down here, or may use some sort of thread seal as well. But I think that's why maybe some of these cars, I also like Harley Davidson's shovel head guy, and all of the shovel heads that I've ever had do the same thing. They mark their territory. They're designed to leak, but that's okay. But I think that's why some of these old cars probably leave some stains in the driveway from places like that, because they didn't have the good grease technology that we have now. So I'll stick this back in. Okay, so I got it all put back together. I did do a little bit of silicone just inside here. I just did a silicone gasket instead of waiting for a gasket kit to come in. I ran this down as tight, it just snugged it up. It's supposed to, when it's sitting right in the center, when it's sitting right in the center, you should feel just a little bit of resistance in the wheel. So right in the center, it should feel like it's got a little bit of resistance in the wheel, not much. Now when you get out here on the edges, it's going to roll free. It's going to roll free. It gets right to the center, it ought to kind of break just a little bit and then roll free again. And that's set up just the way that they recommend it. I will say that the guys that are online that I've learned this from, that are doing the Corvettes, they say that their wheel turns 4 complete revolutions, and that may mean that the steering gear is more aggressive in the Corvette, and that would make sense. This car, the steering gear itself, it will go. Let me show you this. Okay, here we go, here we go, here we go, here we go, here we go. Okay, that's all the way left, and I don't want to bind it, but that's all the way left. So let's go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 1/4 turns. So it's way more than 4 turns for sure. So we go back. You should be set up in center. Should be about 1/8 of a turn. Let's see, about there actually. I think it's where I've got my wheel set center. So it ought to go by 1, 2 1/2, and that should be my center spot. So it should be 1, 2 1/2. Yeah, 1, 2 1/2, and then 1, 2 1/2 again. 1, 2 1/2. So there's my center spot. So that's pretty good, and it does have a little bit of resistance right in the center place where you want it, and I think that's going to be fine. I don't feel anything that feels, bristly or like it's binding. I don't hear anything in it. It seems pretty smooth. So I don't think that gearbox is really going to change. This is going to be a weekend driver. It's not going to be a daily driver. I may put 10,000 miles on this car in 10 years. So building out that gearbox to race on the weekend is probably, or not race, but just to drive on the weekends is probably a little bit of overkill. Anyway, I hope that helps you guys. If you have any questions, post them below, and I'll put the links to the very detailed video that I did find somewhere below. Thanks. Okay, so I got it back on the car, and I'm coming out here, and I'm turning my wheel, and it's working. I mean, it's turning the wheels, it's doing what it's supposed to do, but I notice that there's a little, there's still this slop kind of in the wheel. Now, the thing about that is I'm going to keep doing that, and I want you to look down here at the gearbox itself. Okay, I'm doing that little turn back and forth, and I don't know if you can tell it, but that little bit of turn that I'm doing is turning the pitman arm, that gearbox to the pitman arm. So the slop that's in the steering mechanism, you can even see that pitman arm moving just a little bit. Back and forth, back and forth. And that's less than 1/4 of a turn. So the slop that's in the steering is in the connections between the tie rod ends, the pitman arm, I think that's called the idler arm, those things, and none of that's been rebuilt or gone through. So that's where the steering slop is coming from. So I really feel like that what I've done to this steering box, and it feels smooth. When I crank those wheels and I turn it, I don't feel anything in there, and I'm sitting, still. Motors, weight of the motors down on the concrete. I feel like that is going to be pretty good. Not to knock it off the jack stands, but I don't feel like there's anything wrong with that, and that's going to be great. So I didn't rebuild it probably the way I should have if I want to make everything perfect, but if you want to make everything perfect, you're going to end up with a car you can't afford. And so we're going to make things that will work as good as we can, but I'm going to put a post to that gear that's in there, the new one, online, and I think you'll be shocked at how expensive that is. All right, that's it for this day.